Hello, my name is Madison Clark, and I'm about to tell you a story that will make you question everything you think you know about corporate loyalty and the price of standing up for yourself. 2 years ago, I was just another face in the crowd at a prestigious marketing firm in downtown Chicago, believing that hard work and dedication would be enough to secure my future. I was wrong. Devastatingly wrong. What happened next changed everything. My boss, a man I'd trusted and respected, looked me straight in the eye and told me I was too old at 35. Can you believe that? 35. In a world where experience should be valued, I was being discarded like yesterday's newspaper. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you a certain kind of freedom, a dangerous kind of motivation that can either destroy you or transform you into something unstoppable. Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small heartfelt favor to ask. Please subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up. It costs you nothing but means the world of me. And let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes all the difference. Now, I could have crawled into a hole and accepted defeat. I could have let that moment define me, let it convince me that my best days were behind me. Instead, I made a decision that would not only change my life, but would eventually bring my former boss to his knees in ways he never saw coming. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about transformation, about discovering strengths you never knew you had, and about learning that sometimes the most devastating setbacks can become the foundation for your greatest victories. The road wasn't easy. There were nights I questioned every decision, days when failure seemed inevitable, and moments when giving up felt like the only rational choice. But I pushed through, driven by something deeper than anger, a burning need to prove that experience, wisdom, and determination could triumph over arrogance and prejudice. So buckle up, because what you're about to hear is the true story of how I went from being dismissed as too old to becoming the biggest threat my former boss ever faced. Let me take you back to the beginning, to when I still believed in corporate fairy tales and thought loyalty was a two-way street. Morrison & Associates wasn't just any marketing firm. It was the crown jewel of Chicago's advertising world, occupying 3 floors of a gleaming tower on Michigan Avenue, the kind of place where million-dollar campaigns were born and careers were made overnight. I'd started there fresh out of Northwestern University with an MBA and stars in my eyes. That was 10 years ago, back when I thought working 18-hour days was a badge of honor rather than a warning sign. I climbed the ladder methodically, earning every promotion through sheer determination and results that spoke louder than office politics ever could. By 33, I was Senior Account Director, managing a portfolio worth $12 million annually. I had a corner office with a view of Lake Michigan, a team of 8 talented professionals who respected my leadership and what I foolishly believed was job security. My client retention rate was 96%, the highest in the company's history. I wasn't just good at my job, I was exceptional. Richard Morrison, the company's founder and CEO, had been my mentor since day one. A silver-haired man in his early 60s, with the kind of commanding presence that filled every room he entered, Richard had built the agency from nothing into a powerhouse that competed with the big New York firms. He'd personally recruited me, promising that hard work and results would always be rewarded at his company. "Madison," he'd tell me during our monthly one-on-ones, "you have the sharpest strategic mind I've seen in 20 years. This company's future is bright with people like you leading the charge." I hung on every word, believing that my dedication was building toward something meaningful, partnership perhaps, or at least long-term security. The irony is almost laughable now. There I was, working weekends, skipping vacations, sacrificing personal relationships, all for a man who would eventually throw me away like a broken piece of office equipment. But back then, I was drunk on success and blind to the storm clouds gathering overhead. The first subtle shifts began about 6 months before my termination. New hires started appearing. Bright-eyed 20-somethings fresh from business school with their trendy clothes and their social media expertise. Richard would parade them around the office during client meetings, introducing them as the future of marketing, while I sat there wondering when experience had become such a liability. The atmosphere at Morrison & Associates began changing in ways that were almost imperceptible at first. It started with small things: being excluded from informal planning sessions, finding out about new client pitches secondhand, watching as younger colleagues were invited to lunch meetings that I used to lead. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of managing multiple campaigns was making me see problems where none existed. But then came the restructuring announcement. Richard called an all-hands meeting on a Tuesday morning in March, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something that felt rehearsed and hollow. "We're evolving as a company," he announced to the assembled staff, his voice echoing in the main conference room. "The marketing landscape is changing rapidly, and we need to adapt to stay competitive." What followed was corporate speak for, "We're pushing out the old guard." The new structure would emphasize digital native perspectives and millennial market insights. Translation: they wanted younger, cheaper employees who could work for half my salary while bringing what they considered fresh energy to the table. I watched as several of my peers, all of us in our 30s and 40s, were quietly shuffled into lesser roles or encouraged to seek opportunities elsewhere. Janet Murphy, who'd been with the company for 12 years, suddenly found herself reporting to a 26-year-old who'd been hired just 3 months earlier. Tom Rodriguez, our former creative director, was asked to take a consulting role that everyone knew was corporate speak for managed departure. The writing was on the wall, but I refused to read it. I doubled down instead, working even harder to prove my value. I brought in 2 new clients worth a combined $3 million in annual revenue. I successfully salvaged a campaign that the younger team had nearly destroyed through inexperience. I mentored junior staff and shared knowledge freely, believing that demonstrating my worth would protect me from whatever purge was coming. During this period, I started noticing how differently Richard treated the younger employees. He'd spend long lunch hours with Chelsea Patterson, the new strategic planning associate, discussing innovative approaches that sounded suspiciously like strategies I'd developed years earlier. He'd light up when talking to Jake Morrison, his nephew, as it turned out, about disruptive marketing techniques that were really just repackaged versions of traditional methods with trendy names attached. The final straw came during the Hendrix Electronics pitch, a massive account worth $15 million that could have transformed the agency's future. I'd spent months developing the strategy, conducting market research, and building relationships with their executive team. The night before the presentation, Richard announced that Chelsea would be leading the pitch instead. "Fresh perspective," he said when I confronted him privately. "The client specifically requested someone who understands the younger demographic." Never mind that Hendrix Electronics manufactured products primarily for business professionals in their 40s and 50s, my exact demographic. The Hendrix presentation was a disaster, though you'd never know it from the way Richard spun it afterward. Chelsea, for all her enthusiasm and fresh ideas, had fundamentally misunderstood the client's needs. She pitched a social media-heavy campaign focused on TikTok and Instagram stories to a company selling enterprise software solutions to Fortune 500 companies. I watched from the back of the room as the client representatives exchanged confused glances, their polite smiles barely masking their bewilderment. "We appreciate the creative thinking," Harold Hendricks, the company's VP of Marketing, said diplomatically, "but we're looking for something more aligned with our core customer base." What he didn't say, but what everyone in that room understood, was that they were looking for exactly the kind of strategic, experience-based approach that I would have delivered. The aftermath was swift and predictable. Hendrix Electronics signed with our biggest competitor, Brennan Creative Group, taking their $15 million with them. Richard was furious, but instead of acknowledging the mistake, he doubled down on his new direction philosophy. In the post-mortem meeting, he actually suggested that we needed to be even more aggressive about embracing youth-focused strategies. That's when I made my fatal error. I spoke up. "Richard," I said, trying to keep my voice measured and professional, "maybe we should consider that experience has value too. The Hendricks account needed someone who understood their market, their challenges, their customer base. Age isn't always a disadvantage. Sometimes it's exactly what the client needs. The silence in the room was deafening. 20 pairs of eyes stared at me like I'd just committed professional suicide, which, as it turned out, I had. Richard's expression shifted from anger to something colder, more calculating. I'd challenged him publicly, questioned his judgment in front of the entire senior staff, and in corporate America, that's an unforgivable sin. "Madison," he said, his voice deadly quiet, "why don't we continue this conversation in my office?" The walk down the hallway felt like a funeral march. Richard's office, with its mahogany desk and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River, had always felt like a place of opportunity to me. That day, it felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. "Sit down," Richard said, not bothering with pleasantries. He remained standing, positioning himself behind his desk like a fortress wall. "We need to talk about your future here." I should have seen it coming. All the signs had been there, the exclusion from meetings, the shift in tone during our interactions, the way he'd started praising other people's work while taking mine for granted. But I'd been so focused on proving my worth that I'd missed the obvious truth. He'd already decided I had none. "Madison, you're a talented woman," he began, and I knew immediately that whatever followed would destroy everything I'd built. "But the industry is changing, and frankly, so are our needs. We're looking for fresh energy, new perspectives, people who can connect with emerging markets." "The truth is," Richard continued, settling into his leather chair with the casual indifference of someone discussing the weather, "you're just too old for where we're heading. 35 might not seem old to you, but in this business, it's ancient. Our clients want to work with people who understand their customers, and let's face it, you're not exactly the demographic we're targeting anymore." The words hit me like a physical blow. Too old. At 35. In an industry where wisdom and experience should have been assets, I was being discarded because my birth certificate had the wrong numbers on it. I sat there, stunned, as Richard outlined my generous severance package with the mechanical precision of someone who'd clearly done this before. "We're prepared to offer you 6 months' salary," he said, sliding a manila envelope across his desk. "Non-disclosure agreement, of course. Clean departure, positive references. Everyone wins." He leaned back in his chair, satisfied with his own magnanimity. "Take the weekend to think about it, but I'd recommend accepting. Fighting this would only hurt your reputation in the industry." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Accept the package and disappear quietly, or face the full weight of his influence in a tightly connected industry where reputation was everything. Richard Morrison wasn't just firing me. He was effectively blacklisting me from the career I'd spent 15 years building. I wanted to scream, to throw his precious awards off the shelf, to tell him exactly what I thought of his generous offer. Instead, I found myself nodding numbly, my voice barely above a whisper when I finally managed to speak. "I need time to process this," I said, my hands shaking as I reached for the envelope. "Of course," Richard replied with mock sympathy. "This is never easy. But Madison, you're still young. You could go back to school, learn new skills, maybe transition into something more suitable for your situation." The condescension was breathtaking. Here was a man who'd profited from my ideas, my relationships, my tireless dedication for a decade, now suggesting I was essentially unemployable in my chosen field. As I walked out of his office for what I didn't yet know would be the last time, I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me. Word traveled fast in corporate environments, and my dazed expression probably told them everything they needed to know. The rest of that day passed in a haze. I cleaned out my desk methodically, each personal item feeling like a piece of my identity being packed away forever. My team members stopped by awkwardly, offering hushed condolences and promises to stay in touch that we all knew were unlikely to be kept. This was corporate America. You were either in or out, and I was definitively out. That evening, I sat in my Lincoln Park apartment, staring at the separation agreement and feeling the full weight of what had just happened. Not only had I lost my job, but I'd been branded with the scarlet letter of ageism in an industry that worshipped youth. At 35, I was apparently obsolete. The next few months were the darkest of my life. I'd signed that non-disclosure agreement in a moment of weakness, effectively silencing myself while Richard continued to profit from campaigns I'd developed and relationships I'd built. Watching from the outside as Morrison & Associates took credit for my work was like watching someone else live your life. Job hunting with a subtle blacklist hanging over your head is a special kind of hell. I'd get to second or third interviews, feel the excitement building, then watch as enthusiasm shifted to polite distance. Phone calls would go unreturned. Email responses would become increasingly sparse. It didn't take long to realize that Richard's network was larger and more influential than I'd ever imagined. My savings account dwindled as my confidence evaporated. I applied for positions below my experience level, willing to take anything just to get back in the game. Even those rejections stung, as if the entire industry had collectively decided that Madison Clark was damaged goods. I started avoiding networking events, unable to bear the pitying looks and awkward small talk about my transition period. The lowest point came 6 months after my termination. I was sitting in a coffee shop in Wicker Park, laptop open to yet another job posting that I knew I wouldn't get, when I overheard a conversation at the next table. 2 young marketing professionals were discussing Morrison & Associates, specifically praising Richard's bold restructuring and how much more dynamic the agency had become. "He really cleaned house," one of them said admiringly. "Got rid of all the dead weight and brought in fresh talent. That's real leadership." Dead weight. That's what my 10 years of dedication, my $12 million in annual client revenue, my mentorship of dozens of junior employees had been reduced to dead weight. I left that coffee shop with tears streaming down my face, finally understanding that my former life was truly over. But sometimes rock bottom becomes the foundation for something stronger. That night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, I had what I can only describe as a moment of clarity. I'd been approaching this all wrong, trying to get back into a system that had rejected me, begging for acceptance from an industry that had decided I was worthless. What if instead of trying to rejoin the game, I created my own? The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Start my own agency? At 35, with limited startup capital and a network that had been systematically poisoned against me, it seemed impossible. But as I lay there in the darkness, I realized that impossible was just another word for unprecedented. Nobody expected me to succeed because nobody thought I could, and maybe that was exactly the advantage I needed. I spent the next week researching everything I could about starting a marketing consultancy. I devoured books on entrepreneurship, studied case studies of successful agency launches, and most importantly, began reaching out to former clients who might remember the work I'd done before Richard Morrison decided I was disposable. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria Gonzalez, the marketing director at Midwest Manufacturing, called me out of the blue on a Tuesday morning in October. Maria had worked with me on 3 successful campaigns at Morrison & Associates, and she'd been trying to reach me for months. "Madison, thank God I finally found you," she said, her voice filled with frustration. "We hired Morrison & Associates for our new product launch, and it's been an absolute disaster. The team they assigned has no understanding of our industry, our customers, or apparently basic marketing principles. Can we talk?" That conversation changed everything. Maria didn't just want to vent. She wanted to hire me as an independent consultant to salvage the campaign that Morrison & Associates was butchering. More importantly, she had connections throughout the manufacturing sector, an industry that valued experience and results over trendy demographics. "These young hotshots your old boss keeps sending don't listen," Maria explained during our lunch meeting. "They talk over us, dismiss our concerns, and try to force strategies that might work for tech startups but make no sense for established B2B companies. We need someone who understands that business isn't just about going viral on social media." I negotiated my first independent contract that afternoon, $60,000 to develop and execute a comprehensive marketing strategy for Midwest Manufacturing's industrial equipment line. It was more money than I'd seen in months, but more importantly, it was validation that my experience had value, even if Richard Morrison couldn't see it. Word spread quickly through Maria's network. Within 6 weeks, I had 3 more clients, all established companies in traditional industries that had been underserved by agencies focused on younger demographics. These weren't glamorous tech startups or trendy consumer brands. They were steel manufacturers, logistics companies, and industrial suppliers. But they represented billions in combined revenue and had marketing budgets that dwarfed anything Morrison & Associates typically handled. By January, I'd incorporated Clark Strategic Marketing and moved into a small office in River North. Nothing fancy, just 2 rooms in a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and windows that looked out onto a construction site. But it was mine, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was building something rather than just surviving. The business model was simple: provide experienced, strategic marketing consultation to established companies that were being ignored or poorly served by youth-obsessed agencies. While Richard Morrison chased 20-something demographics with TikTok campaigns, I focused on the forgotten middle, companies with decades of success that needed marketing strategies as mature and sophisticated as their operations. My client list grew organically through referrals and results. I hired my first employee in March, Jennifer Walsh, a brilliant strategist in her 40s who'd been pushed out of her previous agency for being too traditional. By summer, we had a team of 5 experienced professionals, all of whom had been discarded by agencies that valued youth over expertise. 18 months after Richard Morrison had declared me too old, Clark Strategic Marketing was generating $4 million in annual revenue. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving in ways that I'd never experienced at Morrison & Associates. Our client retention rate was perfect, 100%, because we understood something that the youth-obsessed agencies had forgotten. Results matter more than demographics. The irony was delicious. While Morrison & Associates struggled to replace the Hendrix Electronics account and others they'd lost through inexperience, we were signing major industrial clients that had never even considered working with traditional marketing agencies. Companies like Heartland Steel, Continental Logistics, and Premier Manufacturing, firms with revenues in the hundreds of millions that needed sophisticated marketing strategies, not viral social media campaigns. Our reputation in the industry began to shift the conversation about age and experience. Marketing trade publications started featuring articles about the experience advantage and the value of mature perspectives in B2B marketing. I was invited to speak at conferences about strategic marketing for established industries, sharing panels with executives who'd previously dismissed older professionals as outdated. But the real validation came when we landed the account that would change everything: Global Industrial Solutions, a Fortune 500 company with operations in 37 countries. Their previous agency, coincidentally Morrison & Associates, had failed spectacularly with a campaign that tried to position heavy industrial equipment as lifestyle products for millennial decision-makers. We need someone who understands that our customers are serious professionals making million-dollar purchasing decisions, explained Rebecca Thompson, Global Industrial's Chief Marketing Officer, during our pitch meeting. This isn't about being cool or going viral. It's about demonstrating value, reliability, and expertise. The Global Industrial account was worth $12 million annually, exactly the same as my entire portfolio at Morrison & Associates. Signing that contract felt like poetic justice, especially when I learned that we'd beaten out Morrison & Associates in the final bidding round. Richard's fresh perspective had lost to my supposedly outdated experience. News of the Global Industrial win spread quickly through Chicago's tight-knit marketing community. Suddenly, I was getting calls from journalists, invitations to exclusive industry events, and most satisfying of all, resumes from Morrison & Associates employees who wanted to jump ship to a company that valued experience. The transformation was remarkable. In less than 2 years, I'd gone from being dismissed as too old to becoming one of the most sought-after strategic marketing consultants in the Midwest. Clark Strategic Marketing had become the go-to agency for established companies that needed sophisticated, results-driven marketing strategies. But success, as I was about to learn, can make you visible to people you'd rather avoid. The phone call came on a crisp October morning, exactly 2 years after my termination. Richard Morrison's voice was different, smaller somehow, lacking the confident authority I remembered. His request was simple and utterly satisfying. He wanted to hire Clark Strategic Marketing as a consultant to help Morrison and Associates win back major industrial clients they'd been losing to competitors. "Madison," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I think we may have been too hasty in our restructuring. The market has shown us that experience still has significant value, especially in certain sectors." I let the silence stretch, savoring the moment. Here was the man who'd dismissed me as too old at 35, now admitting that his youth-obsessed strategy had been a costly mistake. Morrison and Associates had lost 3 major accounts in the past year. Their revenue had dropped by 40%, and several senior clients had specifically requested agencies with more experienced leadership. "Richard," I finally replied, "I appreciate the call, but I'm afraid we're not taking on new consulting projects at this time. Clark Strategic Marketing is fully committed to our existing client base." It was a polite lie. We could have taken on additional work, but some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. Besides, I'd learned something important about revenge. Living well truly is the best form of it. Today, Clark Strategic Marketing employs 18 people, generates $15 million in annual revenue, and has been recognized as the Midwest's leading B2B marketing consultancy. We've proven that experience, wisdom, and strategic thinking can triumph over ageism and prejudice. But more importantly, we've created something that I never had at Morrison and Associates, a company culture that values every employee regardless of age. Richard Morrison taught me a valuable lesson, though probably not the one he intended. He showed me that sometimes the most devastating setbacks can become the foundation for extraordinary comebacks. Being fired for being too old at 35 was the best thing that ever happened to my career. As I tell my story at business conferences now, I always end with the same message. Don't let anyone else define your worth based on their limitations. Age is just a number, but experience, real, hard-won experience, is invaluable. So if you're facing your own professional crisis, remember this. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming so successful that your former enemies have to call and ask for help.